Okay guys, we are streaming live. (101), I'm William Spaniel, and this lecture is the kickoff to our unit on truth tables. Let's begin by talking about why truth tables are useful. Here is a complex logical expression on your screen. We have 3 simple sentences, and we have 3 different logical connections. We have a negation, and we have 2 conjunctions. My question to you is, just by looking at that, can you tell me when that overall logical expression is true based off of when the component parts are true? In other words, can you easily tell me that this statement is true if P is true, Q is true, and R is true? What about if P is true, Q is true, and R is false? What about if P is true, Q is false, and R is true? What if P is true, Q is false, and R is false? What about the other 4 combinations here? Well, because we have 3 simple sentences, we have 2 to the 3rd power, or 8 different combinations. And because we have so many combinations, it might not be the easiest thing in the world for you to be easily telling me whether this statement is true or false based off of those component parts being true or false. And if I made this even just slightly more complicated, say by adding another logical connective, there's an if-then now on the other side of the conjunction, well, this is going to be a little bit more complicated for you to figure out. And it would be even more complicated if I replaced one of these variables or added another variable here and gave you 4 different variables to work with. Pretty soon this gets out of hand to the point where just looking at it and trying to reason your way through in your head becomes very difficult. And so what a truth table does is allows us to figure out when these things are true or false, when these big and complicated logical expressions are true and false, based off of when the component parts are true or false. And it does this in an algorithmic way, something that's simple and something that we can work through very logically, step by step, and get the right answer. So what we're going to do here is look at how to construct a truth table, and then I'll give you a very simple example. And then later on, we'll look at more complicated examples. So writing a truth table is a 4-step process. The first thing that you're going to do when you take a logical expression, a big logical expression, is to break it down into its component parts and write a column for each simple sentence. After you've done that, you're going to create additional columns for each additional more complex expression in order of the complexity. So you build from small to big. You take smaller logical expressions and you write down a column for those, and then you create bigger ones based off of logical expressions that you've created previously. After that, you fill in all possible truth values for all simple sentences, and then you go from left to right, again in order of complexity, in each of those columns, using previous column's truth values to deduce the truth values of the current column that you're looking at. And as you go through this, you'll eventually finish, because if you go left to right, the right eventually has an end, and once you hit it, you'll be done. So here we're going to look at a very simple example. Let's look at the sentence P or Q. This is as simple as it gets, right? I've just got a disjunction here, nothing more, nothing fancy. So the first step is to write a column for each simple sentence. Here we have P and Q. There are just 2 simple sentences, so we write 2 columns for that. The next step is to create additional columns for every more complex sentence in the original sentence in order of complexity. Well, here there's only one more complicated sentence than P and Q, which is the disjoint between P and Q, so P or Q. So we fill in that 3rd column for that. That completes step 2 for us. So step 3 is for us to go through each and every single possibility of truth values for the simple sentences. So here we have 2 simple sentences, so we have 4 combinations of truth values. So P and Q can both be true, P can be true and Q can be false, P can be false and Q can be true, and then P and Q can both be false. And then we go from left to right, filling in more complicated columns. Here we only have 1 more column left to go, so this is going to be very quick. You remember back to our lecture on disjunctions, on that or expression. We know from that P or Q is true when at least one of those simple sentences is true. If both of them are true, then it's still true. So that means if we look at the first row, we see that P and Q are both true. So that means we'll fill in true for the top row for column 3. When P is true and Q is false, that's the second row. Well, at least one of those is true, so P or Q will be true. In the third row, P is false and Q is false. So that means, or rather, P is false and Q is true. So that means that the third row of the third column will be true because Q is true in that case. And it's only in this fourth row when both are false that P or Q is false because both of those things are false. So we finish this truth table by writing in that. We see it's true, true, and true followed by a false. So in the first three rows, at least one of those two simple sentences is true. It's only in that last row where both are false. So P or Q is false. So that's how to fill in a very, very simple truth table. And in the next lecture, just to preview what we're going to do in the next lecture, we'll look at a more complicated truth table like that. So here we're going to be looking at the expression not P or P and Q. It's a little bit more complicated. It'll be a little bit more work to do, but it'll be good at reinforcing that step-by-step method I gave you to develop truth tables. Hope you enjoyed this and hope to see you next time. Take care. Welcome back to Logic 101. I'm William Spaniel, and in this lecture we are going to do some very quick truth table practice. Last time we saw this algorithm on how to write a truth table, and we applied it to a very simple example. Now I want to apply it to a slightly more complicated problem, and the problem looks like this. We have a compound sentence that looks like that, not P or P and Q. And again, we might be curious when this statement is true and when this statement is false based off of when P and Q are true or false. And so we need to construct a truth table to figure that out. So again, truth tables just have 4 steps. The first step is to create a column for each simple sentence. So we see that this bigger expression
तेरे को क्या काम है लाइव स्ट्रीम हो रहा है या ना हो रहा है पूछ रहा हूँ एनी प्रॉब्लम 55 बरकत करनी है
has only 2 simple sentences, P and Q, and so we start off the truth table by writing P and Q, each in their own individual columns. The second step is to create another column for each additional, more complex expression in the order of complexity. So you'll notice here that on the left side of the disjunction, we have a not P, so we can write a not P as one of the columns. On the right side of the disjunction, we have P and Q, and so we want to go with that first because it's inside of those parentheses before we finish with the biggest statement possible, which is just the original statement, not P or P and Q. So that gives us 5 columns total. The third step is to fill in all possible truth values for the simple sentences. So we have P and Q, just 2 simple sentences, which means we have 2 to the second power total possible values of truth for each of those. So we have 4 rows in total. The top row is where they're both true, bottom row is where they're both false, and the middle rows are where one is true and when the other is false. And then we are now left with just our final step, which is to go from left to right in the columns using previous columns to deduce the truth value of the current columns. So let's go one by one. Let's start off with this third column where we have not P. So not P is simply the inverse of P. Wherever P is true, not P is false, and wherever P is false, not P is true. And so that's exactly what we see there. We just have the inverse of the first column there in the third column for not P. For the fourth column, we have P and Q. So we're going to be looking for where both P and Q are true, and we're going to mark that as true, and the rest are false. So we see that the first row is where both P and Q are true. Every other row has at least one of those being false. So the top row is true for the fourth column, and the bottom 3 rows are all false. And then that allows us to unlock our final step, which is just looking at the truth value of that last column. So we have not P or P and Q. This is a disjoint, so we look for where at least one of those 2 are true. And because we were looking at not P as well as P and Q, that means we're looking at rows 3 and 4. So we're looking at rows 3 and 4 to see where at least one of those is true. And when that is true, then we'll put a true in the 5th column. And when that's false, we'll put a false in the 5th column. And so that's exactly what we do here. So you'll notice in the top row, we have P and Q being true. So that fulfills the 5th column as being true because the right side of the disjoint is true. In the second row, both not P and Q are false. And so that means the disjoint is false. And in the bottom two rows, we see that not P is true, and so that fulfills the disjoint, and we have true for both of those columns, or both of those rows, rather. And that is a simple application of a truth table, and we will be looking into more applied stuff with truth tables in the next few lectures, where we start talking about how we interpret conditionals and the exclusive or on a truth table. Join me then. Welcome back to Logic 101. I'm William Spaniel, and this lecture is on implications in truth tables. Let's kick off with a slight amount of review. Here's a truth table for the implication if P then Q. Remember that we start a truth table off by creating columns for each simple sentence in the overall big sentence. So here there's just two, P and Q. Then we create additional columns for each more complicated sentence after that. Here there's only one more complicated sentence, if P then Q, the conditional itself. I'm leaving the other two columns blank for now. We'll fill them in a moment. Then we fill in the rows for each combination of truth value for the simple sentences, so we've seen that pattern before. And then using those combinations of truth values, we fill in the following columns. Well, here we have one more column to fill in, and it's a conditional. And if you remember back to our first lecture when I introduced conditionals to you, you might remember that I told you that the conditional is true if the antecedent is true and the consequent is true as well, or if the antecedent is false. The only way that an implication is false is if the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. So if we fill it in, we'd have it looking like this. So in the first row, both the antecedent and consequent, P and Q, are true, so the implication is true. For the bottom two rows, the antecedent is false, so the implication is true. And it's only in that second row where the antecedent is true, P is true, but Q, the consequent, is false. So here, it's not the case that P is actually implying Q, because we have P being true, but we have Q not being true. So we fill in the column for the implication just like that. This is a definitional thing, and if you recall, I told you that despite the fact that saying that the implication is true when the antecedent is false, that might be a little bit weird, that's the way that we should do it. Why is it the case that we actually have these vacuously true statements being called true instead of being called false? Well, I want to show you here why we do that. You might be thinking to yourself, instead of having vacuously true statements, these implications that don't really have much bite to them precisely because the antecedent is false, why don't we just switch the truth values around to look like this? Why isn't it the case that definitionally we say that the implication is defined as being true only when both the antecedent and consequent are true and false in every other situation? Well, I want to again show you why that's the case here in this lecture, and I'm going to do that by talking about the biconditional. So P if and only if Q. This is the truth table for P if and only if Q. Remember that the biconditional, going back to the lecture when I introduced the biconditional, is nothing more than combining both implications from both sides of the biconditional. So we have if P then Q. Notice I've switched the truth value, the vacuously true statements where P is false, back to being true in that third column, if P then Q. For the fourth column, we have if Q then P, so we've just flipped the implication around. And then in the last column, we have P if and only if Q. Again, remembering back to that lecture that introduced the biconditional is just the conjunction of those two implications. So if P then Q, and if Q then P. So if we make that replacement in the truth table, in the right column, we no longer have P if and only if Q. We have if P then Q, and if Q then P. Those are the exact same things, but having this replacement here is a bit easier for us to work with if we've never seen a biconditional before, because we know how conjunctions work in these truth tables. So let's fill in the rest of this truth table. When is the fourth column, if Q then P, true? Well, when we have vacuously true statements, it's going to be true in that first row when both P and Q are true. And it's going to be true in both the second row and the fourth row, because in the second row and the fourth row, Q is false, so the implication is vacuously true. And it's only in that third row, where Q is true and P is false, that the implication is false, because P is not actually being implied by Q here, because we have Q being true but P being false. So that's why we have a false in that case. So we have true in the first case, vacuously true in the second case, false in the third case, and vacuously true in the fourth case. Now we're prepared to fill in that fifth column, which is the conjunction of the previous two implications. Remember that a conjunction is true if and only if both of the component parts are true. So if we look down the third and the fourth column, when are those both true? Well, they're both true in the first row, and they're both true in the fourth row. In the middle two rows, at least one of them is false. So we fill in that fifth column as being true in the first case, being false in the middle two cases, and being true in the last case. So now that we have that, why is it the case that we don't have vacuously true statements being false? Well, let's switch this back to being P if and only if Q. And now let's switch the truth values of the vacuously true statements to being false. When we have vacuously true statements being marked down as false. I want you to look at the first two columns. If P, or rather P and Q, so the first two columns, you'll notice that in the first row, both of those are true. They have the same logical identity. They're equivalent. And you'll notice that in the fifth row, when we have the biconditional, P if and only if Q, we have that being marked down as true. So that has successfully recovered the fact that P and Q are logically equivalent in this case. In the second row, P is true and Q is false. They're no longer logically equivalent. So the biconditional should recover that fact. We see that in the fifth column, second row, we have a false marker there. So that's right. It's not the case in that second row that P and Q are logically equivalent. Same story in the third row. This time P is false and Q is true, so the biconditional should be marked down as false. Still good so far. But then you hit that fourth row. Here, P and Q are logically equivalent. They're both false. So the biconditional should recover that equality. It should be the case that P and Q are logically equivalent. And yet because we have marked down vacuously true statements as being false, the conjunction of those vacuously true statements is false as well. And so the biconditional does not recover the fact that P and Q are logically equivalent. That is not the case when we have vacuously true statements being marked down as false. Now, with the vacuously true statements being true, once again, you see that in the fourth row, where both P and Q are false, then both of those conditionals are vacuously true. So we have true markers now in the fourth row in columns 3 and 4. And we have the biconditional in the fifth column, fourth row, accurately recovering the fact that P and Q are logically equivalent. And that's why we need vacuously true statements to be true. Otherwise, we lose out on this ability to recover the fact that in these cases where P and Q are false, we have logical equivalence. So that's why we mark down vacuously true statements as being true, and that's how you work with implications in truth tables. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time when we talk more about how to write things down in truth tables. Join me then. Welcome back to Logic 101. I'm William Spaniel, and this lecture is on the exclusive OR, which you will recall means an OR expression where one part is true and the other part is false. And in my introduction to the
फेक का कोई रोक नहीं हाँ बॉडी फिट ग्रामिट कोई फ्लॉप नहीं एक सांस में गिनाने का कोई शौक नहीं मिट की जो एहसान आज भूल नहीं कितना भी खा ले पर मना शुक्र मुझे जीतने का शौक है ना हारने का डर वक्त मेरा बुरा हालात तेरे बदतर क्या बोलता ब्रो सुने लेक्चर मेरी हर एक बातों का अर्थ है एक हक नहीं तो सिर्फ एक दर्द है इस महफिल में बहुत कुछ अर्ज है इन रैपर्स के लेना मेरी फर्ज है अब शोर मचाता पहले था मैं शान तेरा भाई अमराज है तो मैं भी है बान दिमाग बोले लाफे दे दिल बोले जाने दे नाम में जीतू चाइना माल कंकड़ में चट्टान ब्रो तू लाता सुनामी मैं तूफान ब्रो सब कुछ छोड़ अपने घर को संभाल ब्रो असल में हसल तू खोटा बवाल ब्रो मत लेना किसी का एहसान ब्रो मतलब ही नहीं बन इंसान ब्रो खुद को मत समझ भगवान ब्रो अपने घर को तू जाके संभाल ब्रो क्या बोलता ब्रो क्या बोलता ब्रो क्या बोलता क्या बोलता क्या बोलता ब्रो क्या बोलता ब्रो क्या बोलता ब्रो क्या बोलता क्या बोलता क्या बोलता ब्रो क्या बोलता ब्रो क्या बोलता ब्रो क्या बोलता क्या बोलता क्या बोलता ब्रो तू क्या बोलता ब्रो क्या बोलता ब्रो क्या बोलता क्या बोलता क्या बोलता ब्रो क्या बोलता ब्रो क्या बोलता ब्रो
क्या बोलता ब्रो पानी पीता क्या ब्रो
लाला क्या बोलते हैं ये सब रैपर लोग तो
ये मेरा ग्लास है
मेरे को लगा टावर है क्या बोलता ब्रो पढ़ो
म्हणजे पढ़ो पढ़ो ब्रो हिंदी बोलता ब्रो गुजराती बोलता ब्रो अंग्रेजी बोलता है अंग्रेजी ब्रो जर्मनी में रहता है केवल तू क्या बात बताने वाला था वो तो करता ही नहीं मैंने कब बोला था बता रहा हूँ पर छुपा क्यों रहा है तो मुझे कोई दो बात नहीं मेरे मुंह से बोल दे तो लिख के बोल दे टेक्स्ट कर टेक्स्ट कागज पेन मत बाद में टेक्स्ट करके बोल दो, ठीक है?
तो बोल सकता है ना वो बात।
हाँ
बोलना सर्च मारो एना ऊपर वो तो मैं अत्ते मारे दो
ऐसी बात है कि ये बोल सकते समझा जा रहा है नहीं ठीक है उसका
और तेरा मुंह से जलने लाल होता सब
और वो बड़ा गया
खात रहा है और 2-3 बार खातेगा तो मुंह ही बाहर
तेरे घर पे
या
कुत्ता किससे घर पे
मेरे घर पे
The inclusive OR
रोज इसी टाइम पे आवाज आती है क्या कल क्या है
अच्छी बात
मॉम
चले
अब बोल तुम ऐसे ही ना
I am a human in substance.
I said that there's a way to write down the exclusive OR using just the logical notation that we already have. So what I want to do in this lecture is twofold. First, I want to show you how to write down the exclusive OR using just the logical notation that we already have. And second, I want to verify that that is the way to write it down, and I'm going to verify it by using a truth table. So we get a little bit of extra practice in here with those truth tables. Let's get to it. This is how you write down the exclusive OR. You say P or Q and not P and Q. Why is that the exclusive OR? Well, it might not be so easy. So let's work on a truth table and verify that that is correct. So I've done a little bit of the work already here. We have two simple sentences, P and Q. I've gone ahead and filled in all the combinations of truth values for those two simple sentences. And then in the last column, we have the overall expression P or Q and not P and Q. So if that is in fact the exclusive OR, what that should recover is a truth value of false in the top row and the bottom row, and a truth value of true in the middle two rows. So it should be false in the top row because both of those things are true, and it should be false in the bottom row because both of them are false, whereas it should be true in the middle two rows because one is true and the other one is false in those middle two rows. So that's what we should expect out of our truth table if, in fact, that last column does represent an exclusive OR. So let's go through this process of creating a truth table to actually get to that. So the other three columns are filled in like that. So we have on the left side of the conjunction, disjunction between P and Q. So that's what we see in column 3. And on the right side of the overall conjunction, we have the negation of P and Q. So we start off with the non-negated version. So we have just regular P and Q there. And then we, in the next column over, negate that fourth column. So we have not P and Q in the fifth column. And then that unlocks the overall expression, which is the conjunction of column 3 and column 5. So now that we have those things filled in, we can go through each column and fill in the truth values for those columns. So let's start with column 3 here. We have a disjunction between P and Q. Remember that a disjunction is true when at least one part is true. It's false when both parts are false. So that means we have a truth value of true in the first 3 rows and a truth value of false in just the bottom row. For the fourth column, we have a conjunction. Remember that a conjunction is true only when both of the component parts are true. It's false when at least one of them is false. So that means we have a truth value of true in the top row and a truth value of false in each of the bottom 3 rows. For the fifth column, we have a negation of the fourth column. So that is essentially flipping the on and off switch in the fifth column from the fourth column. So we take the fourth column and
ये साले नमन तू कुछ पढ़ नहीं रहा बे कब का मस्ती कर रहा है
सॉरी मैंने इतना लिखा है
अगर ऐसा हो ना तो निकल जा
भाई हम दोनों को पढ़ लेते हैं तू पढ़ रहा है क्या
मैं वीडियो देख रहा हूँ मेरे को 50 वीडियो देखने का है इसके ऊपर
और ये केवल ही चालू किया ना बात तेरे पीछे कौन भौंक रहा है ने तेरे आगे क्या चल रहा है तेरे नीचे क्या हो रहा है
देख सीख केवल से
अच्छा बेटा मुझसे सीख
कॉमिक बुक है कॉमिक बुक
मैंने अभी लिखी है पूरी
अब चुप बैठ
केवल
And we take all values of true and switch them over to false, and we take all values of false and switch them over to being true. And if you do that, then we just have that there. So we have a false value in the top row and a true value in the bottom 3 rows. And that leaves us with the overall expression, which I told you is an exclusive OR. So it's P or Q and not P and Q. And that's a conjunction of columns 3 and 5. So for any other conjunction, just like any other conjunction, we look to see when both of those columns are true, and we mark down those as being true. And when at least one of them is false, we mark it down as being false. So if we look at columns 3 and 5, we see that columns 3 and 5 are both true only in the middle 2 rows. So we give true values to the middle 2 rows, we give false values to the top row and the bottom row. That's because in the first row, column 5 is false, and in the bottom row, column 3 is false. So in those 2 cases, in the top case and the bottom case, we have at least one part of the conjunction being false, which means the conjunction is false, whereas in the middle component parts being true, so the conjunction is true. And that is why that expression, P or Q and not P and Q, is in fact an exclusive OR. So we got a little bit more practice in with truth tables, and that's good. And we have a little bit ways to go on truth tables in this unit, so join me next time when we get to one of the those last parts of truth tables. Take care. Welcome back to Logic 101. I'm William Spandel, and this lecture is on complicated truth tables. Essentially, what we'll be seeing here today is why we never ever want to use truth tables again to deduce logical truth. And the reason is because it is a pain in the butt. And to show you why, let's take a look at this compound expression. We have P and Q, or not, if R, then P or S, with the parentheses as the order of operations, as you see on your screen. So you might see already why this is going to be a pain in the butt. We have a whole bunch of logical connectives, but worse than that, we have a whole bunch of different simple sentences. We have 4 simple sentences here, P, Q, R, and S, and that's going to make life difficult for us. Now, I've gone ahead and at least created the columns for the truth table that you see here. Notice that this is way bigger than anything we've encountered before. Before, I think we've looked at most 4 rows because we only had 2 simple sentences. But as you increase the number of simple sentences in a truth table, you increase the size of the truth table exponentially. So we have 4 simple sentences. There are 2 to the 4th power number of rows here. So we show you how annoying these things are to fill out. I'm going to do it live. This is the first time, so we're going to hope it all works out very well.
He was such a disgraced person. You are such a perverted hypocrite. You are such a perverted person. It's not great. It's great. Down and on it. Evil woman will get me gold. Evil flower with a remarker. Look at them. 72 थी 38 हो गई। हाँ तो ऐसा हो गई।
always is to create every single combination of truth values for the simple sentences. So the way you do that is you start off with the first simple sentence and you go halfway down with truths. So there's going to be 8 truths here. That's 6, 7, and 8. And then you go false with the rest. So we have 8 truths, 8 truths and 8 false. And then you go to the next column over and you are going to go halfway down the truths with truths. That's hard to say. And then halfway down with false. And then for the next half, for the falses, you go halfway down with truths and halfway down with falses. For the next column over, you're going to repeat this process. So for the top part of true values for Q, you go with true for R. And then on the second half, you go false. And then you go back to being true. And then you go back to being false. And then you go back to being true. And then you go back to being false. And then a couple more times here, true, true, false, false. And then for the last one, you just alternate. So it's going to be true, false, true, false, true, true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false. That is brutal just filling out that. Imagine if we had a fifth simple sentence. Instead of having 16 rows, we'd have 32.